For 3 years, he was just the quiet old security guard standing by the building's door. Not a real father, just a stepfather. A man no one remembered, no one cared about. Every day he bowed his head in greeting. Every day he was ordered around, looked down upon as if he didn't exist. But it was him who raised the one standing at the very top today. And then, because of a single cup of coffee spilled on the floor, the entire company had to bow their heads to him. Because sometimes, the man quietly standing behind the door is the one holding everyone's fate in his hands. Everyone thought they knew who he was, but the truth would silence them all. His name was Luther Hayes, 66 years old, an age when most people would think about resting, spending quiet days surrounded by grandchildren. But every morning, precisely at 7 a.m., he appeared at the main lobby of Weldon Industries, the city's most renowned tech conglomerate. He wore a dark blue security uniform, the cuffs frayed at the edges. Pinned to his chest was a small badge that read, "Luther Hayes, Security Staff." The letters had faded over the years, the badge's corners worn from brushing against his pocket too many times. Luther wasn't the kind of man anyone noticed. In fact, to most people at Weldon Industries, he was practically invisible. The older man standing by the glass door, umbrella in hand, quietly bowing to everyone who passed. But very few ever returned that bow. Some younger employees treated him like old furniture. There were those who talked on their phones while walking right past, nearly bumping into him, never bothering to turn back. That morning, like every other, Marcus Crane, the regional director, arrived in the lobby. Marcus was the kind of man used to having people clear a path for him. Black suit, gold watch, coffee in hand, typing on his phone as he walked. As he neared Luther, Marcus casually tilted his coffee cup, letting a few drops spill onto the polished stone floor. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. Luther bent down, pulling a small cloth from his pocket, quietly wiping each drop of coffee away. His hand trembled slightly, but he moved carefully, as if cleaning something precious. Not a single sigh escaped him. Daniel Cooper, Marcus's junior manager, arrived just then. Seeing the scene, Daniel tilted his head slightly, speaking just loud enough for Luther to hear. "Old man like that, why bother working at all?" Marcus glanced at Luther, adjusting his shirt cuff, smiling coldly. Whether someone like him's here or not doesn't make a difference. The two men walked on, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving Luther alone, kneeling on the white stone. At the reception desk, Elise, a young new hire, witnessed everything. Her lips pressed tightly together, her hands clenching the folder she held, but she didn't dare say a word. She knew perfectly well. In this place, if you didn't have status, it was better to stay silent. Luther slowly stood up, tucking the cloth back into his pocket. His eyes showed no anger, just a calm, quiet look, like a frozen winter lake. He returned to his spot beside the large glass door, standing upright as always. Behind him on the wall hung a large portrait of CEO Cameron Weldon. Beneath bold words, "Integrity above all." Others hurried past, busy with their own lives. No one paid attention to the old man with the faded security badge anymore. But Luther kept standing there, steady as ever, bowing his head, quiet. No one knew and no one wondered why a man like that, at his age, still chose to stand there every single day for 3 years straight. That afternoon, as employees dispersed for lunch, the grand lobby grew noticeably quieter. The glass walls reflected sunlight, casting a faint golden sheen across the white stone floor. And Luther Hayes still stood there, in his usual spot beside the main door, his posture straight and steady, like a habit that would never change. There was something few ever noticed. Whenever the lobby was empty, Luther would often stand silently, gazing toward the large wall opposite the reception desk. On that wall hung a single silver-framed photograph, large and commanding. The picture showed CEO Cameron Weldon, a young man in a dark blue suit, sharp gaze, arms crossed in front of his chest, the Weldon Industries emblem boldly displayed behind him. And just beneath the photo, printed in large capital letters, "Integrity above all." Luther stood still, eyes fixed on that image, but his expression wasn't like others when they looked at the CEO's photo, out of respect or fear. His gaze was different, calm, touched with something like quiet regret and remembrance. Elise happened to catch that moment as she returned to the reception desk. She looked up from her stack of files, her eyes drifting toward Luther. He stood motionless, both hands resting on the handle of his umbrella, eyes lifted toward the photo, as if he were speaking silently to the man inside the frame. Elise felt a flicker of curiosity. To her, CEO Cameron was a distant name, the highest authority in the company, yet someone almost never seen by lower-level employees. The fact that Luther, an old security guard, would look at that photograph for so long, so silently, made her wonder, why? But in the end, Elise said nothing. She quietly turned away, telling herself it was probably just a lonely old man's habit, finding small comforts to pass the long hours standing guard. Meanwhile, Luther kept that same gaze until the clock struck the next duty hour. Only when the lobby began to fill with people again did he lower his eyes, bowing gently to each person passing by as always, his face calm, as if he had never been looking at anything at all. But if anyone had stopped long enough to truly watch, they would have realized what Luther was looking at had never been just a picture. That afternoon, on the top floor of Weldon Industries, the CEO's office was bathed in soft golden light, accompanied by the steady sound of typing. Inside, Cameron Weldon was in a video conference with international shareholders. On the screen before him were financial figures, profit charts, new project reports. But in the bottom right corner of the screen was a small window showing the live feed from the ground floor security camera, a habit Cameron maintained to keep an eye on headquarters. And then, Cameron's hand suddenly froze. He looked up, eyes fixed on that camera window, his brows drawing together ever so slightly. An older man stood by the glass door, a dark blue security uniform, salt and pepper hair, hand resting on an umbrella, posture perfectly straight, unmistakable. Cameron narrowed his eyes, his heartbeat slowing. He didn't look away from the screen. A shareholder's voice echoed through his earpiece. "Mr. Weldon, we're waiting for your response." But Cameron didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, enlarging the camera window. The man had just bowed to an employee walking past, then stood again, quietly looking up at the CEO's portrait on the wall. Cameron almost whispered to himself, "Luther." In that moment, all surrounding sounds seemed to fade. He stared at the image of that man as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. Luther Hayes, the man who once took him to school, taught him how to tie his shoes, cooked him simple dinners when his mother was working late. Luther, his stepfather, the man he hadn't seen in over 20 years. Why are you here?" Cameron's voice dropped to a low murmur, completely forgetting about the meeting still in progress. His hand clenched into a fist on the desk, eyes locked onto the screen. But instead of rushing down to the lobby right away, Cameron sat still, his gaze gradually regaining its sharp, icy focus. Not yet. He needed time. He needed to see how Luther was living now, and he needed to know, among all the people working for him, how many truly respected that old stepfather. The meeting continued, but for Cameron Weldon, from that moment on, everything had already changed. From that afternoon onward, everything at Weldon Industries seemed to continue as usual to everyone else. But only Cameron Weldon knew. Every move inside the building was now under his close watch. No one realized that from his office on the top floor, Cameron had issued private instructions to the internal monitoring team. Every camera feed from the main lobby, the ground floor hallways, even the reception area, was now streaming directly to his office. He didn't want to step in just yet. He needed to observe a little longer. Because Cameron wasn't only trying to confirm that Luther was okay. He wanted to see clearly, among all the people wearing his company's badge, who truly lived up to the words Weldon Industries proudly displayed above its door, integrity above all. The next morning, a day that seemed as calm as any other, became a silent test. Marcus Crane walked into the lobby with his usual confident stride. Following close behind was Daniel Cooper, arms full of files. The two chatted as they walked, eyes glancing lazily past Luther standing in his usual position. For no reason at all, Marcus stopped right in front of Luther, tapping his fingers lightly on the reception counter beside him, his gaze distant. "Old man, standing out here all day in the wind again?" Luther simply bowed as usual, saying nothing. Daniel looked him up and down, then shrugged. "I've always wondered why they haven't replaced him yet. Most companies hire younger, stronger guards these days." Still, Luther stayed silent, not offering a single word in reply. From the reception desk, Elise watched quietly. Her hand unconsciously tightened around her pen. And over the days that followed, Cameron kept watching through the cameras. Elise was the only one who occasionally stopped to ask Luther a few quiet questions. "Mr. Hayes, is it too cold for you today?" Or late at night after her shift, she would press a hot tea into his hand from the vending machine. "Here, keep your hands warm." Small actions, quiet gestures, but in Cameron's eyes, that was exactly what set Elise apart. In contrast, Marcus and Daniel grew bolder. One morning, Cameron watched as Daniel deliberately dropped a stack of files onto the floor right in front of Luther, then stepped back, arms crossed. "Pick that up for me, will you?" Luther bent down quietly, picking them up without a word. Cameron sat in silence in his office, eyes fixed on the camera feed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His silent test was still ongoing, but in his heart, Cameron already had his answer. Not everyone deserved a place at Weldon Industries, and not everyone had the right to walk past a man named Luther Hayes without bowing their head. Late in the afternoon, as the lobby quieted down and the last light of day slanted through the tall glass windows, casting pale streaks across the stone floor, Elise was on the final shift. She noticed Mr. Luther still standing there beside the door as always, his figure steady but silent as ever. That scene stirred something in her, a quiet question she could no longer keep to herself. Elise walked closer, her voice gentle. "Mr. Hayes, at your age, why keep working so hard? Honestly, you could just retire and rest." Luther smiled softly, his eyes not on her, but still fixed on the large portrait on the wall, CEO Cameron Weldon, beneath the words "integrity above all." "Young lady," he said in a low voice, gaze distant, "there are some people who work not for the money, but just to keep their heart from feeling too empty." Elise hesitated, then asked, "Do you know CEO Weldon?" Luther shook his head, his lips curving into a gentle smile, though it couldn't quite hide the sadness in his eyes. "No, I wouldn't say that. It's just, his face looks familiar, like someone I knew a long time ago." Elise glanced at the photo once more, then back at him. "So, how long have you been working here?" Luther answered slowly, 3 years. I applied just to earn a bit of pension money to pass the days. Back then, I didn't even pay attention to what company this was. Just figured, big building, steady job. That's enough." He adjusted the faded security badge on his chest and continued, "When I was younger, I had a family. My wife has passed, and her son. I was his stepfather." Hearing that, Elise quietly lowered her head in respect. Luther looked out through the glass doors, his voice steady. "When my wife died, I thought it was best for me to leave. I didn't want him living under my shadow. Didn't want people saying things about a rich boy with a stepfather who worked as a security guard or did manual labor." He paused, pulling an old silver watch from his pocket, its face scratched and cloudy. He gazed at it for a long while, then spoke again. "This watch, he gave it to me when he was 12. By now, I'm sure he doesn't even remember me anymore." Elise looked at the watch, then at him. She seemed about to say something, but in the end she held back. Luther put the watch away, smiling faintly. "Anyway, standing here each day, watching people come and go, looking at that face on the wall, it's enough." Elise gave a small nod, asking nothing more. She understood. There are things a person keeps quietly for themselves, without needing anyone else to fully understand. And Luther Hayes, he was likely one of those people. That morning, the atmosphere at Weldon Industries felt completely different from usual. From the main lobby to the hallways, people moved hurriedly, holding documents, phones, and walkie-talkies. Today was the annual shareholders' conference combined with the launch of a new project, one of the biggest events of the year for the corporation. Not only top executives, but also members of the press and foreign investors were attending. Everything was being broadcast live on national financial news channels. And yet, Luther Hayes still stood in his familiar spot beside the large glass door. His old, worn security uniform looked even more out of place amid the sleek suits and perfectly pressed shirts that filled the space around him. Elise passed by, greeting him softly. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." He only nodded in response, his quiet eyes following the streams of people passing by without saying anything more. In the distance, Marcus Crane and Daniel Cooper were double-checking the guest list and security arrangements. They were in charge of today's event, which only made their attitudes even more arrogant, treating everyone beneath them like hired help. Marcus glanced at Luther briefly, then leaned toward Daniel, lowering his voice. "Still hanging around at his age really ruins the view." Daniel gave a quiet chuckle, nodding in agreement, but didn't say more. Too busy handling VIP arrivals. Around 8 o'clock, guests began arriving. Luxury cars lined up one after another in front of the lobby. Elise and the reception team rushed back and forth, doing their best to keep the welcome area orderly. Yet no matter how busy she got, whenever Elise happened to pass by, she would always glance at Mr. Luther. And in her eyes, there was no longer just quiet pity, but a silent kind of respect. Throughout the morning, Luther remained in his place, not moving once. Even as the sun began slanting through the glass windows, casting his silhouette onto the white stone floor. He had no idea that at that very moment, from the top-floor office, Cameron Weldon was watching him through the security cameras, as he did every day. Cameron wasn't attending the event directly from the start, but he observed everything, and he knew perfectly well it wouldn't take much longer now. Everything that needed to be revealed would soon come to light before everyone's eyes, without him needing to intervene. Because a person's true character always shows itself clearest on the days they think matter most. At exactly 10 a.m., the ground-floor auditorium of Weldon Industries was filled to capacity. Shareholders, business partners, the press, all settled in, ready for the event now being live-streamed nationwide. At the front of the hall, Marcus Crane and Daniel Cooper were busy directing the staff through the final preparations. Their faces looked tense, but their eyes betrayed an unmistakable arrogance as they stood above those under their command. Meanwhile, outside in the lobby, Luther Hayes was still in his usual position, standing guard like every other day. Same old umbrella, same faded uniform, same steady, quiet eyes. Until Dash. A foreign guest stepped out of a car, accidentally dropping a folder onto the polished stone floor right at the entrance. Marcus, standing nearby, didn't call over a receptionist. Instead, he turned his head sharply, eyes flicking toward Luther with clear intent. "Old man, get over here," Marcus barked. Luther walked over slowly, his expression calm as always, showing no resistance. Marcus bent down as if to pick up the folder, but instead he deliberately tilted his coffee cup, splashing it onto the floor, right in front of the VIP guest's shoes. Brown droplets stained the pristine white floor in stark contrast. Marcus turned toward Luther, lowering his voice just enough that everyone around could still hear. "Clean this up. What are you standing there for?" From the reception desk, Elise saw everything. Her hands clenched the folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Luther looked down at the spilled coffee, then up at Marcus. His face remained unchanged, but in his eyes for just a moment there was something difficult to name. "Hurry up," Daniel Cooper added with a sneer. "You think you get paid just to stand around?" All of it unfolded right in front of the live-stream cameras broadcasting the event preparations. Viewers watching online had already begun murmuring in the comments. "Elise, what are you waiting for? Get him a cloth," Marcus snapped. Elise pressed her lips tightly together, her eyes red but unable to defy the order. Silently, she bent down, grabbed a cleaning cloth from beneath the desk, and handed it to Luther. But Luther didn't take it immediately. Instead, he bent down slowly, kneeling on the cold stone floor, pulling from his own pocket the small handkerchief he always carried. And with that, he gently wiped each drop of coffee, one by one. No one said a word. Other employees lowered their heads, pretending not to see, afraid to get involved. The flash of cameras flickered here and there. Some journalists had already captured the scene. Whether by accident or on purpose, no one could say. Luther quietly continued the task as if it were the only thing he'd ever known how to do. But just as he remained kneeling there, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Without needing to be told, everyone turned at once. Elise dropped her pen onto the reception desk, her lips parting in a whisper she couldn't voice. The auditorium doors swung open, and the person who stepped through was none other than Cameron Weldon, the CEO of Weldon Industries. And from that moment on, the entire room fell into absolute silence. The entire auditorium fell into complete silence. Even the background music for the event stopped suddenly, as if someone had just flipped a switch. From the far end of the long hallway, Cameron Weldon appeared, dressed in a sharp black suit, tall and composed, walking slowly yet with unmistakable purpose. No announcement, no receptionist leading the way. Each of his footsteps echoed through the tense, breathless space. Cameron's cold gaze swept across the entire room. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Elise stood behind the reception desk, gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes fixed on that man. Marcus and Daniel had visibly gone pale. Daniel's hand trembled as he tried adjusting his tie, fingers shaking uncontrollably. Marcus opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Cameron didn't spare either of them a single glance. He looked only at one person, Luther Hayes, the old man kneeling down, wiping coffee stains off the cold stone floor. No greetings for the guests, no opening speech for the event. In the middle of all the cameras, under hundreds of watching eyes, Cameron simply walked straight ahead. Luther looked up at the sound of footsteps. He paused, his hand stopping mid-motion, eyes blinking slowly as he recognized the man approaching. Cameron stopped right in front of him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned down, gently grasped Luther's wrist, and helped him to his feet, right there in the middle of the auditorium, beneath all the lights and lenses. Two men. One old, hair turned pure white. One young, every inch the CEO in presence and command. Standing face to face as everyone watched. The air felt thick enough to touch. The only sound left was quiet, shaky breathing. Elise raised her hand to her mouth, eyes shining with tears. Cameron looked directly into Luther's eyes, his voice deep and steady, yet clear enough for the entire room to hear. Without needing a microphone, "Dad, stand up. You don't have to bow your head to anyone here." At that moment, time seemed to freeze. Every rumor, every curious glance, every unspoken question zeroed in on the two of them. But no one dared ask. No one dared say a word. Luther stood still, unmoving. His aged hands trembled slightly, and in those time-worn eyes, a thin layer of mist slowly gathered. Cameron kept holding onto his hand. Firm, unwavering. He didn't say another word, but with just that one sentence, the entire auditorium would never be the same again. One sentence. But everyone understood. This wasn't just business as usual. The entire auditorium remained in absolute silence as Luther Hayes stood up straight, facing Cameron Weldon. The two men looked at each other. Neither rushed to speak. In the heavy, pressurized air, their eyes carried something deeply personal, something entirely human, untouched by titles or status. It was Luther who spoke first. His voice was rough, low, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. Are you Cameron?" Cameron gave a slight nod, his grip on Luther's hand tightening, as if to pass strength through it. "Yes, it's me." Luther stepped half a pace back, blinking quickly as though he couldn't believe it. "But I was only your stepfather. I didn't want to make things difficult for you. I thought you'd forgotten about me." That sentence echoed in the room, making Elise at the reception desk hold her breath. No one dared interrupt that conversation. Cameron looked directly at his stepfather, his gaze no longer cold and distant like the CEO people usually saw. Instead, there was something raw in his eyes, an emotion held back for years. "You're the only one who ever taught me how to be a man," Cameron said, his voice thick, controlled. "The one who took me to school, taught me how to tie my shoes. I never forgot you. Not once." His tone slowed, but each word landed like nails driven into the ground. "I've been looking for you. For 20 years. Luther's hand visibly trembled now. The old silver watch on his wrist caught the light of the auditorium. The watch Cameron had given him as a boy. Elise couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears streamed down her face. Even the employees standing around began glancing at each other with changed expressions. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was real shock. Because now they understood. The old man they'd spent years ignoring and ordering around was the stepfather of the CEO of Weldon Industries. Luther's voice shook, lips trembling. "Then, all this time, you still remembered?" Cameron pressed his lips together, nodding slowly. "I never forgot, and I'll never let anyone disrespect you again." The two men stood there, under the glaring lights of the grand event. Yet somehow the moment felt strangely private. No grand speeches were needed, just one hand gripping another, one nod, enough to make up for 20 years apart. The entire auditorium remained frozen in silence. Some lowered their heads, others kept looking up, but no one dared utter a single word. Cameron Weldon released Luther's hand and turned to face the gathered employees, shareholders, and business partners. This time his voice rang out firm and commanding, no longer just for the two of them. "I believe everyone here is wondering what's going on." The whole room seemed to hold its breath. "So let me make it clear, right here, in front of everyone. The man you all just humiliated. The man who has been standing guard at this building's entrance for the past 3 years. He is not just an ordinary security guard." Cameron's gaze swept across the crowd. Elise raised her hand to cover her mouth, eyes red and brimming with tears. Marcus and Daniel stood frozen, faces drained of color. Cameron lowered his voice, each word sharp as steel. "He is my father." A true wave of shock rippled through the entire auditorium. Whispers spread, camera flashes fired. On the live stream, comments flooded in, filling the screen. "I can't believe this. The CEO's father. What is happening?" But Cameron didn't stop there. He raised his hand, signaling for silence, then looked directly at Marcus and Daniel. Marcus Crane, Daniel Cooper. Both men visibly trembled. Daniel stammered, trying to say something, but Cameron cut him off, his tone colder than iron. "As of this moment, both of you are officially terminated, effective immediately. The reason? Severe violation of ethical standards and core values of Weldon Industries." No one protested. No one dared speak in their defense, because everyone had seen it with their own eyes just moments ago. Marcus bowed his head in shame. Daniel slumped into his seat, unable to say a word. Cameron turned back to face the entire hall, his gaze steady and unwavering. Weldon Industries was built on one single principle: integrity above all. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO, a director, or just a security guard. Here, everyone deserves the same respect. He paused for a moment, his eyes glancing toward Luther, still standing quietly at the back. "And if we fail to uphold that, then everything we've built means nothing." The entire auditorium rose to their feet in applause, at first scattered, then swelling into a wave that echoed through the room, lasting for several long minutes. Behind the reception desk, Elise clapped along, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. Cameron lowered the microphone, his expression softening. He stepped back toward Luther, once again gripping his hand tightly, in front of hundreds of respectful eyes. In that moment, no one was thinking about CEOs and security guards anymore. All that remained was the image of two men, one old, one young. One who had raised, one who had grown. standing side by side beneath the brilliant lights of life's true stage. 2 days after that unforgettable event, Weldon Industries held an official press conference. But this time it wasn't to launch a new project or introduce a product. The guests included all employees, major shareholders, and the press who had witnessed that powerful moment days before. And in the very same auditorium where Luther Hayes had once knelt to wipe coffee off the floor under so many judging eyes, everything now felt completely different. On stage, Cameron Weldon stood tall. Beside him was Luther, dressed in a completely new security uniform. The name badge on his chest now read clearly, Luther Hayes, Chairman Emeritus. Cameron's voice was calm and warm, no longer the cold tone people usually associated with a CEO. Today, I officially announce, before all of Weldon Industries and the world, Mr. Luther Hayes, once called the old security guard by many, will now hold the title of Chairman Emeritus of the corporation. The auditorium erupted in applause. Elise stood among the crowd, eyes shining with tears, but her smile bright and clear. Cameron looked around the room and continued, "This is not just to honor him as an individual, but to remind all of us. The true value of a person is not in their title or the uniform they wear, but in the quiet things they've done. The things they've given throughout their life, silently and without asking for anything in return." Luther stood there calmly, his expression peaceful, eyes as humble as ever. When invited to speak, he simply shook his head gently, refusing the microphone. Instead, he stepped closer to Cameron, lightly patted him on the shoulder, and spoke softly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I don't need a title, Cameron. All I want is to keep standing guard, like always." Cameron gave a quiet smile, not objecting, only nodding, "If that's what you want." The ceremony ended in a warm, respectful atmosphere, unlike anything the company had ever known. Elise was officially commended by Cameron in front of the entire company for being the only person who had treated Luther with true respect from beginning to end. She was promoted to senior front desk coordinator, and from that day on, every morning at Weldon Industries, everyone would see Mr. Luther Hayes standing by the large glass doors as always, still in the familiar blue uniform, still holding his usual umbrella. But there was one thing that had changed. Now every employee who passed him would bow deeply, not out of fear, not out of formality, but with genuine respect. And Luther would simply nod in return, his lips lifting into the faintest smile, as if he had always been there. Not just to guard a building, but to stand watch over the things that mattered most. Integrity, humility, and gratitude. 1 week after the honoring ceremony, Weldon Industries had returned to its usual work rhythm. But there was one thing that would never be the same again. That morning, the early sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the lobby, casting bright patterns across the polished stone floor, just as it had for years. And as always, Luther Hayes stood at his familiar post. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and the security badge on his chest now clearly displayed, Luther Hayes, Chairman Emeritus. No one saw him as just a security guard anymore, but he still chose to keep that role. Elise walked by, carrying a stack of files. As she neared him, she bowed deeply, without waiting to be prompted. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." Luther gave a gentle nod in return, his expression calm and kind as always. One by one, every other employee who passed did the same. Old staff, new hires, all greeted him in the same natural, quiet way, as if it had always been part of the company culture. No one dared walk by, pretending not to see him anymore. From a distance, Cameron Weldon stood watching. He said nothing, simply standing beside his stepfather, hands in his pockets, his gaze turned toward the sky outside. There was no need for many words between the two of them. One young, a powerful CEO. One old, a stepfather who had quietly raised him with his own hands. The large glass door behind them closed softly, but the sunlight continued pouring in. On the wall, the portrait of the CEO and the words "integrity above all" still hung there. But now, for anyone walking into this building, that motto no longer felt like just empty words. Because everyone understood, Integrity wasn't about what was printed on the wall, it was about how they treated the quietest, most invisible person standing behind that door every single day. When the last person had passed by, the lobby fell into stillness once more. Luther stood tall, his eyes gazing out toward the street, and as Elise returned to her desk, she smiled softly to herself, whispering as if reminding her own heart. There are some people who spend their whole lives standing behind the door, but they're the ones who keep that door open for everyone else. Her voice drifted gently through the peaceful space, like a closing line to a story that Weldon Industries would never forget. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Who has quietly stood behind the door in your life? Black Rise, telling the stories no one tells, about the people no one remembers.